Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Selling Greenville, your favorite real estate podcast here in Greenville, South Carolina. I'm your host, as always, Stan McCune, realtor right here in the lovely area of Greenville, South Carolina, and you can find all of my contact information in the show notes if you need to reach out to me for any of your real estate needs. And just a reminder, as always, please like, rate, review, subscribe to the show. Make sure you don't miss any future episodes. That is one of the only things we ask of you guys. The other thing being that you support Piper Insurance Group. They are sponsoring this episode. They insure home, auto, and umbrella policies. They're an independent insurance agency, so they can quote multiple different carriers to get you the best possible quote. In South Carolina, North Carolina, and Georgia, they can do investment properties, including flips, rentals, ground-up new construction, commercial properties, all of those things. So please reach out to Piper Insurance Group. Also, contact info in the show notes and get a free quote from them today. I'm very tired today. I just got out of an 8-hour class, which very sadly is only for real estate purposes an 8 credit class, but it's going to be another 8 hours tomorrow. I don't know how they're legally allowed to do this, to cram 8 hours into or cram 16 hours into an 8-hour class. Nonetheless, that's what I'm doing. Last week, I took an accredited buyer's representative class. This week, I'm taking a real estate negotiation expert class. And these are just the sorts of things that realtors take that is just a part of our continuing ed to improve us. These are all electives, by the way. I'm not required to take any of these. They don't go towards my real estate license in any way. It's just me perfecting my craft, trying to become better at what I do. But I'm tired. I just sat through it just ended 9 minutes ago. And I've actually got my desk in the standing position. So if my setup looks a little bit different, or if the lighting's a little bit different or whatever, that's why. I'm just really tired of sitting. But I appreciate you guys tuning in. I just want to, sometimes people just like stories. And sometimes stories are really powerful ways of communicating what's happening, right? And so we've got a lot happening right now. A lot of questions about the market, a lot of questions about what's going with the hurricane, a lot of questions with what does my business look like? Those are probably the 3 questions that I get the most often and right now. And so I'd like to actually just address these things with you guys by means of a single story from a listing that I currently have. And I think you guys will find this to be quite interesting. So a little bit of backdrop for the story. Earlier this year, an out-of-town investor wanted to sell me a mobile home that he had. He because he wasn't local to the area, he had secured this contract. This is a very common thing, by the way. There's a lot of out-of-town, even out-of-state investors that are trying to farm the Greenville market to try to find motivated sellers to try to get homes under contract. Usually, they end up just wholesaling those homes off to other potential end buyers. But sometimes they will just take them themselves and will just list them on the market as is, or they will flip them, or whatever the case may be. Well, this investor specifically, his first option, he wanted to wholesale it. He reached out to me. I went over there and I went to look at it, took some photos, but we just couldn't really come to a consensus on how the numbers would work for me as an investor to purchase it. And also for him, he's trying to get a cut as well. So it just didn't work out between the two of us. And so he ended up simply purchasing the property himself. Well, he told me, he was like, hey, if you help me out a little bit, just from the standpoint of like connecting me with some people for the rehab, then I will list the home with you. I've had people say those sorts of things, but I play the long game. I should say I've heard people say those sorts of things and not be honest about it. This is someone that I trusted would be honest. And so I went ahead and connected him with some of my contractors, and then just didn't hear back for a while. I wasn't sure what was going on. Really, I knew if he was going to list with me, if he was going to be honest, that I would hear back from him. There's no point in me bugging him about it. He's busy. I'm busy. We're all busy. Well, I finally heard back from him a few months later, and he was good on his word. He said, hey, let's go ahead and list the house. So I went back over to check it out. Of course, in his mind, it's ready to list. But I get over there, and I'm going around doing my normal pre-listing walkthrough, and there's still a good bit of finishing touches left. And I went ahead and handled this directly with a contractor to kind of get this over the finish line, communicated with the seller, let him know what was going on. The grass, this is a big lot. The grass was over a foot tall. So that was really high. With the seller's permission, I just went ahead and took care of that with and some other landscaping issues with my own crew that handles that sort of stuff. And the seller wanted to get this home listed ASAP. Like, basically, he called me thinking it's ready to sell right now, and was like, hey, get the pictures, get it listed, let's get it on the market in the next day or two. So I got all of that done. I get my photographer out there the next day, as soon as that lawn was taken care of. Not everything on the inside was quite done yet, but it was good enough to take pictures. I got my assistant out there to measure the house. And then once I got those photos and pictures in, I was able to get it listed, and once, all the touch up on the inside was done, I was able to get it listed right away. I mean, within just a few days of that initial contact that the seller had made to let me know that they wanted to list the home. Now, I just summarized a lot in just a few minutes, but just so you know, that was multiple days worth of work to get to the point of listing the home. And if you're a realtor listing this, you already know that. If you're not a realtor, that might come as a surprise. A lot of people just think that realtors, when they're listing a home, that it's really a really simple process. You don't do a whole lot of work, throw it on the MLS. That's that. And yeah, there were contractors and other people involved locally, but you have to remember that I was the only boots on the ground that really is seeing this home from a holistic perspective. The owner himself had never even been inside the home. So there's there's an onus on me to kind of be the eyes and ears for the sellers. Oftentimes I'm that for buyers, right? Because a lot of buyers will buy homes sight unseen. If they're coming from out of town, we'll do FaceTime showings. But at the end of the day, they can't smell, what does the home smell like? They can't really get a sense of, okay, oh, the floor is a little wavy here. I think I see some stains on the ceiling that might not come through on the video. Things like that. When it's a vacant home, realtors that are listing the home, we have to be the eyes and ears for the sellers as well. And so that's not to be rah-rah, hear about realtors, but these are some of the values that realtors provide, because I know that there's a lot of people out there that don't see that. So I don't want to just move past it without pointing that out. So anyway, I list the home. As I've told you guys a few times on here before, we're in a weird market. It's still mathematically, numbers-wise, a seller's market, but buyer behavior is abnormally slow, abnormally hesitant, abnormally skeptical, picky, all of that. And there's just a lot of general nervousness in the market, I feel like. People are scared to make a mistake. People are scared to sell for less than their home is worth. People are scared to buy for more than it's worth. All of these things. There's more nervousness in this market than I have ever seen in a real estate market in my entire life. So many people are paralyzed right now, or are acting paralyzed on the basis of how they feel, and just general hesitancy and reticence about what's happening in our economy, presidential election, all of these good things. And one thing I'm telling my sellers frequently is that a bird in hand is worth two in the bush, right? I hate to use cliches like that, but in a market like this, sometimes you just got to take the bird in hand. And we got a bird in hand after we listed the home pretty quickly. An agent right away expressed interest in the home on behalf of their client. I did a little pre-negotiating with this agent while I painted the picture of what I and my client look for in an offer, something that I'd already discussed with my client. And on that basis, this agent went ahead and sent in an offer. Now, the offer is pretty good, but my client was on the fence with it. It wasn't a perfect offer, right? No offer is perfect at the end of the day, but it was strong in many ways. We didn't really have any upcoming showings on the schedule. So even though we had gotten an offer really, really fast, there wasn't a whole lot of indication that we might get more offers in the future. So my advice was to counter the offer, to sweeten it a little bit. And this is if you have a very good offer in hand, but you have a bunch of showings coming up, your strategy is different than if you have an offer in hand and there is just no showings coming up. And it's also different if you have an offer in hand the first weekend that a home is listed versus after the third or fourth weekend that the home has been listed after and have had no offers between now and then. So we're in an interesting situation. Get an offer the first weekend, but there's really no other showings coming up. My advice to the seller was take the bird in hand in this market, because there is no guarantee that you're going to get another offer. And if you just reject this one outright, probably the buyer is going to go away. And, if we come crawling back to them with our tail between our legs, a few days or a week later, the offer is going to go down. Like, that is almost certainly what's going to happen. Now, maybe you're wondering why counter the offer and not just accept it on the basis of everything that I just said. Well, I had two reasons. One, I had already said on this episode, my client was on the fence about accepting the offer, but I really thought he should. In my opinion, if it were my home, I would have accepted that offer or something close to it. So countering the offer to sweeten it a bit is a middle ground, something to make the seller feel like, okay, I didn't just take the very first thing I got. I got a little bit more out of it. And that makes people feel good, particularly investors. Investors, frequently they have kind of a hang up in their mind that they need to get a little more, just squeeze a little more, right? And of course, the class that I just took about being a real estate negotiation expert, which was taught by someone who went to Harvard and learned negotiation at Harvard, so he's not just a nobody. But he doesn't like that strategy of trying to just squeeze something, trying to negotiate to squeeze something just for the sake of getting something. And I agree, but sometimes in order to bring someone off the fence, you have to do something like that. And at the end of the day, it's my job, I was representing the seller. It's my job to get as much as I can for the seller. So that's one reason. The other reason, I mentioned this before on the show, but countering an offer, even in a small way, really reveals a lot about the other party. And there are some times when I feel like it doesn't make sense to counter. Like if you just get an amazing offer and the buyer's agent had already kind of asked you, what do we need to do to make this offer, to knock the socks off of the buyer or off of the seller. And you tell the agent all of those things, and then they do all of those things. It can sometimes in that situation be kind of sketchy if you come back to them and they say, well, there's actually a few more things that you need to do, right? That's an example in which I wouldn't necessarily encourage a counter. But in most situations, I like to counter even a strong offer because you learn about the other party. You learn about that buyer and the buyer's agent. In my opinion, the second most important thing for a seller, besides the contract price, right, the amount that they're going to get on a contract, is how much the buyer actually wants the house. Now, a buyer who truly wants the house and truly loves the house much more than generally the field that's out there, they're much more likely to get to the closing table than a buyer who likes the house but doesn't love the house, right? That's common sense. But the part that's not common sense is how do you figure that out, right? How do you figure out whether a buyer loves a house versus simply liking it? And we have to be careful with fair housing laws when it comes to some of the stuff in terms of what kind of questions we ask and things of that nature. And I mean, even buyers that send in love letters, which is, again, that's hotly debated in fair housing circles right now. But even if you send those love letters in, I have not found those love letters to directly correlate to a buyer that actually, truly, genuinely wants to buy the house. I've seen situations where people sent love letters with lowball offers. And so to me, that's not an indicator. There's really no indicator, clear indicator within the contract itself outside of just making it super duper seller friendly. Which again, most buyers right now in this market aren't doing because they're not comfortable making a super duper seller friendly offer. So usually buyers are still putting some provisions in offers that protect them or that are a lower price or whatever the case may be. And so this is a situation that we find ourselves in. But as I've already alluded to, one thing that directly speaks to how much a buyer loves a house is how they respond to a counter offer. If they don't respond well to a counter offer and won't negotiate, that tells me that when issues happen within the transaction, they are almost certainly going to be difficult and not work towards a resolution. So this is kind of a feeling out period, right? We can kind of get a sense for, okay, because every transaction has something. Every transaction has something that happens at some point. I mean, there's very few that it's just like ultra smooth the whole way. Nobody asks for anything. There's no twists or turns or anything. 99% of transactions have some sort of twist or turn that happens during the course of it, in real estate at least. And so this is a way to kind of figure out, okay, well, how will they react? Here's a small situation where they have to respond to a little bit of conflict, a little bit of a twist and turn. This will be indicative of how they'll respond to potential bigger ones if we go under contract. In fact, I had another listing recently where we had multiple offers. One of the offers was cash, the others were financed, and all the offers were really, really similar except for that one cash offer. And typically, if you have offers that are pretty much all the same except one of them is cash, the seller is going to accept the cash offer because there's fewer things that can go wrong. No appraisals, no financing contingencies, no financing conditions coming back on the appraisal, all of these sorts of things. And so that would typically be more appealing. But in the case of the cash offer that we had in hand, there was a really easy out and a very long due diligence period for the cash buyer. And so I talked to the seller about it. And in my opinion, the best approach was to counter that offer with terms that made it a little bit less easy, not even that much more difficult, but just a little bit. It shouldn't be super easy for a buyer to back out, particularly when a home has just come on the market. And that was the case with this one. Long story short, we countered that and they responded, nope, the offer we sent, that is the original offer. It is the highest and best offer. Well, they didn't tell me that when they sent it. And that's not usually a good sign, right? Usually that's an indicator these people are going to be difficult during the transaction. So then we went to the others that we had offers from. We countered them on several things, and it became clear that one of the parties really was willing to negotiate and really seemed, just based on how they were responding to my communications and to, quite frankly, my demands, and which were reflective of the seller's demands, that they were willing to negotiate. So I spoke to the seller, and the seller ended up accepting a financed offer over the cash offer that they had in hand on the basis of them being more willing to negotiate than the cash offer. And it definitely ended up being the right decision. Maybe I'll tell that story later. But that's a whole nother story. But to support this strategy or to give a little bit another example of this strategy. But back to this listing specifically, I now have an offer in hand that we are countering, a financed offer. But it was more than just a counter. There was actually, quite frankly, a lot wrong with the offer beyond just that there were some terms that needed to be countered. I'm not going to go into a lot of specifics, but I actually had to print off the offer and highlight all of the things that needed to be fixed on it. And there were like minimum 3 to 4 things per page. This is like an 8-page offer. And I'm highlighting or circling or crossing out 3 to 4 things. This would normally be a major red flag for me, and I mean, it still was a red flag. But this normally would have been a major red flag for me, except that I had worked with this agent before, and I knew that with this agent, the paperwork side of things wasn't their strength. And that was something that I was okay working with, right? I can be the one that is more detailed on the paperwork. I don't know what their value proposition is to their client. It's not on the paperwork side of things, but I can come alongside and help, right? That's where agents can sometimes help each other out. So I did all of that legwork for this agent. Sometimes we have our clients, on the seller side, we'll just cross things out and initial them, but there was so much that needed to be amended that we would have just been crossing out and initialing everything. So that's why I went ahead and I was just like, I think the best thing for me to do is to do all of this, is to print out and highlight and circle and annotate everything and then scan it, send it back to this agent, and then have the agent just do a brand new contract. And I didn't want to do it for my seller. I didn't want to have to do all that legwork for my seller and then have my seller sign, because what if we got another offer in the meantime? Now my seller signed this offer. That creates a whole different set of circumstances. So we went about it that way. And so while that agent is working on the draft, the second draft of the offer, then I contact the lender, and I want to vet out the lender. I want to vet out the borrower, the potential buyer. And of course, mobile homes, they can be tricky to finance. And it's never a good idea to enter into contract on a mobile home with a buyer who doesn't have financing really teed up. And a lot of lenders can't handle financing on mobile homes. So in this case, the lender and the borrowers, after my conversation, they both seemed to be good. So we moved forward. I got the paperwork cleaned up. We get under contract. Now, if you think that's the end of the story, this is actually where things get interesting. We had a whole due diligence process to get through, and that went relatively well. A bunch of repairs were requested, mostly reasonable ones, some kind of unreasonable, but we got a game plan together with the seller, and we decided we were able to negotiate back and forth, get it to a point where both parties were okay with it, and then we start working towards knocking out those repairs. I went ahead and, with the seller's permission, arranged contractors to handle the repairs. And again, I'm summarizing hours and hours of work here on just this repair and negotiation and coordination, all of that. But you guys get the point. I'm not going to belabor just how much time this takes. Just know it takes a lot of time. But then we also need an engineer's report to ensure that the home's foundation was properly affixed to the ground, something required for FHA loans. And so these mobile homes, they are affixed to a permanent foundation using straps and stakes, along with piers and metal beams and whatnot. And the engineer said that all this needed to be done differently than how it was currently. So I get with the contractor again, have them start working on that. And quite frankly, the contractor didn't have any experience with this type of thing. So I'm trying to communicate and coach them up, which was obviously a process. And so we start working towards that. In the meantime, the appraisal comes in, which of course comes in lower than our contract price. And when a home doesn't appraise for the contract price, either the buyer has to come up with the money, the seller has to reduce the price, or the contract just falls through, assuming the contract was contingent on the appraisal. Well, the buyer couldn't come up with more money, and the lender confirmed that with me. The seller at first wanted me to dispute the appraisal to try to see if we could get the number higher. But I did some research into the comps that the appraiser used and potential comps that he missed. Then I spoke to an appraiser friend of mine who's very good, and we all concluded that it just wasn't worth it. It just was not worth it. It's going to delay closing. Probably not going to result in any changes because the appraiser didn't make any obvious mistakes or miss any obvious comps. It was one of those that was, all appraisals are subjective, and I could nitpick some of the adjustments that the appraiser made, but at the end of the day, I didn't have a real good case. And my appraiser friend of mine verified that. He was just like, I don't think that you have much of a case here. And so rather than going through that and then delaying closing and going through all of that, we just opted to simply move forward with a lower price, unfortunately. And I should say it's worth noting that the appraised value was almost exactly what I had told the seller prior to listing that the home was worth. But I digress. Okay. Me and the appraiser were basically on the same page here. Now, while we're working on all of this, Hurricane Helene hits. And of course, this throws a monkey wrench into everything. And my first thought is the home damaged? In fact, when I got back on the road after Helene, this was the first property I went to check out because we were so deep into all of these different things. And sure enough, there was a massive tree down in the backyard. But thankfully, no damage to the actual structure of the home. Thank goodness. So now we're working on repairs. We're working on fixing a foundation to an engineer's liking. We've already reduced the price. Now we're having to remove a tree on top of everything else. So I'm communicating with all parties to get all of this done. Obviously now our closing has to be extended as a result of all of this. I mean, every closing has had to be extended because of the hurricane. And as part of the title search on the property, it was brought to my attention that the home had been purchased recently enough that it falls within what we call the FHA flip rule. Basically, if you're buying a home with an FHA loan, the seller can't have owned the home for fewer than 90 days from the effective date of the contract. Well, the seller had in fact owned the home for fewer than 90 days, so when we extended the contract because of the hurricane, we actually had to write a brand new contract in order to be FHA compliant. No big deal, right? We're just taking everything we had before and just doing it all over again. But the date of signing is going to be later. So I offered to the buyer's agent to go ahead and help them out by just writing up that new contract myself. Different situation than before because we're already under contract. Now we're just doing a de facto extension just on a new agreement. That agent was okay with that arrangement, so I went ahead and wrote it up. Reminder, we're past all inspections and everything, so obviously I kept the original inspection terms, meaning that the buyer had no more inspections left, and the contract was no longer contingent on any inspections because they were all done, already past the point in which they were supposed to be checked on and all of that. And, you know, we had already agreed on everything up to this point. So everyone signed it. All was good. Then suddenly I get a text a week later from the buyer's agent freaking out that the contract stated that the buyer was past all inspections. Now, I have no idea why they were upset about this since I didn't change anything from the original contract. And additionally, it revealed that both the fact that the buyer's agent freaked out about this a week later, that was revealing to me that the buyer's agent hadn't even read the contract until a week later. And even then, this agent hadn't probably read the contract. There's a reason why it was brought to their attention that that we were past inspections. But anyway, it was not a good look for them, and it was a very weird moment. Thankfully, I did not hear again about it, but these are the sorts of weird things that we have in these transactions. So anyway, the foundation work was finally completed. Took a long time. And I had asked the contractor to take pictures of the work because that's what the engineer requested. Well, needless to say, the sub who did the work didn't take the pictures. So guess who now has to go back out to the property just to crawl in the crawl space and take pictures? Yours truly. Of course. So I went back out and crawled the crawl space because nobody else is going to do it, obviously. To take pictures of all the straps and piers in the foundation, which is certainly not my favorite thing to do. And I am no expert in mobile homes, by the way. I've had fewer than 10 mobile home transactions in my entire career, which is more than most, probably. But still, in comparison to the dozens of other closings I've had, it's very small. So I'm no expert on mobile homes. I'll be honest about that. But to my eye, the work that was done down there didn't appear to be done correctly. Nonetheless, I went ahead, I took my pictures, sent them to the buyer's agent, hoping against hope that the engineer would sign off on them. Meanwhile, the tree still hadn't been removed, the tree that fell during the hurricane. So I'm talking to my tree guy, who's obviously completely slammed with work from the storm. He assured me that he would be out there soon. Then I get a message from the lender that the appraiser was stating that we needed to purchase a new data plate for the mobile home. Now, if you're not familiar with mobile homes, a data plate is a one-page document that gives you very specific details about the mobile home, details that are required for an FHA loan. They aren't ever supposed to be removed from a home, but unfortunately, when the renovations were done, the data plate, which was inside of a kitchen cabinet, had in fact been removed. Now, I'm thinking, great, I'm going to have to go back out to the home again. And I haven't even gone through every instance where I've gone to the home, but I've by this point been to the home roughly 10 times. And it's not particularly close to where I live, so I really don't want to have to go back out there if I don't have to. But there are certain details that you need in order to be able to order a new data plate. And I wasn't sure that I had those details, but I knew one place where I might, and that was in my photos, because I had taken photos of various things at the home. And I thought that maybe I had, a copy of the VIN number or a copy of the exterior metal plate or something that might be able to help me out. So I start looking through my photos that I had taken at the house. And this brings me to my favorite part of the story. It's my favorite part because I saved myself time and I also saved my client money because it would have cost at least $125, if not $200 in order to order a new data plate. When I was going through my photos, I actually found that all the way back in January, when I was talking to the seller about potentially buying the home from him prior to him renovating it, I had actually taken a photo of the data plate and had completely forgotten that I had done this because it was so long ago. And so I was like, well, I don't even know if the lender is going to accept this or if the appraiser is going to accept this, but I'm sure going to try to get this accepted. So I sent it into them, and would you know it, they actually accepted my photo that I had taken from January of the data plate. So I was just giddy about that. I was much more excited than the seller was about it, but I don't care. I was excited. I think he was definitely, just investors, any money you save them, they're excited. So he was definitely pumped about that. Just not quite as pumped as I was. So then we heard back from the engineer. And needless to say, the repairs were not done correctly to the foundation. So the contractor sent another sub back out. And this time the sub actually did take pictures and sent them to me. But reviewing the pictures, I could tell it still wasn't right. So I sent the contractor back out again. They reworked the repairs and sent me more photos. And this time it looked better. It looked better. During this time, the tree finally got removed as well. So we're very close to the finish line, but we're not there yet. This home still hasn't closed, and I still haven't gotten the final sign-off from the engineer for the foundation work. FHA also, part of the flip rule, they're required to send out a second appraisal, a second appraiser for a second appraisal, something we are still waiting on, and there's a decent chance that we'll have to do something as a result of that. I also just found out, literally just moments ago, that one of the photos from the foundation work had in the background, you can see a stake that's sticking up out of the ground. That's not allowed to do that. So now I'm literally going to end this podcast and head back out to the home to crawl in that in the crawl space to try to get a photo, to try and see if the stake was fixed. I just don't have a correct photo of it. But when I take on a listing, I don't expect it to be a walk in the park. I get paid to work, and I will continue to work until I get paid at closing, okay? And I do this for all of my clients. Some transactions involve more work than others, but I anticipate that they will all involve work. And then if some of them don't require as much work for one reason or another, that's great for me. We've all done this. Everyone that works, you have some projects or responsibilities that are easier than others. Same thing in real estate. Some listings, some buyer clients are easier than others. Some are very difficult. Some are very hard. This one I would probably put, on a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being insanely difficult, 1 being a walk in the park. I would put this one at maybe a 6. I've had much, much more difficult ones than this. And a lot of that is because the seller has been great to work with. The seller hasn't, with all of these little hiccups that we've run into, the seller hasn't caused those to be problematic. So what's the point of the story? Well, I wanted to give you guys a glimpse into my life as a realtor. Of course, many people think this is a simple job, and there are easy days, I've already alluded to, and there are not easy days like any job, but it's far from simple. Let's just get that out. It is far from simple. And if you want to buy or sell a mobile home, here's another reason why I mentioned this story. This is a good look behind the curtain for you at some of the challenges involved in that process. Do not get rid of the data plate. Tell your contractor the contractor will not get paid if they get rid of that piece of paper. And imagine trying to do this without a realtor involved. Again, I'm not trying to do this whole, pat myself on the back kind of thing. But the reality is it's a common trope that people say that realtors who list houses don't do anything more than just put the home on the MLS. And that is simply not true. A good realtor navigates the entire transaction from start to finish, and that's just a part of the job. And I'll be honest, for time's sake, I left a ton of details out. This was the briefest I could make this story because, again, I need to run to a house right now and get in the crawl space. I just took an 8-hour class. I can't do a 2-hour podcast. Y'all wouldn't listen to it anyway. I'm not Joe Rogan. But nonetheless, I hope you found the details that I did include in the story, the way I said it, interesting. If you need to buy or sell a mobile home, let me know because I'm a little bit of an expert now. Maybe I wasn't before, but I'm a lot more of an expert now. And I'd be happy to help you with that or any other real estate needs you have in the Greenville area. My contact info is in the show notes. Piper Insurance info also in the show notes. Please rate, review, subscribe, all of those good things. And we will talk again next time.